I'd like to say a few words about possible hidden drawbacks to digital tools. Um, and I will make a bit of a detour, but bear with me. I think it will illustrate what I'm saying pretty well. Um, People think of free speech, and I think of that as unrestrained speech, but I would change that a little bit and think of it as free or expensive, put it in economic terms. And that if you were in a country that does not have free speech, um, if you were to speak freely, it's very, very expensive. And you'd better really think that what you're saying is very, very important because you might pay with it with your life. So if you're listening to the radio in one of these awful places, and you hear someone come on the radio and start saying things that you know will get them killed, you know that that person is paying a very steep price to saying what they are saying. And you listen to it, you value it. Your jaw drops open. You go, wow, I'm definitely respecting that. But free speech here, if you're listening to a radio where anyone, you're in the Western world, anyone can say pretty much anything they want, nobody listens because speech has no value to it because it didn't cost anybody anything. So people run their mouths and nobody really listens, and that is a good thing. I'm not saying that there should be censorship of any kind, but now let's move this metaphor over to the digital world versus the traditional art world. If you have a 30 by 40 inch piece of Arches 300-pound watercolor paper, and you're going to put on that first big wash, you better be really certain about what you're doing because that is expensive. It's expensive to get the paper. It's expensive to, just time-wise, to stretch it, and you can't go back. So when I look at a big oil painting that's highly finished, I know that somebody probably very carefully thought about what they were doing before they did it. Whereas with digital tools, it's infinitely flexible. It's more like free speech. Now, I'm not saying if this is good or bad. I think it is important to think in this way because it has insidious effects on the artwork that's produced, that people do produce. That if I am going to spend a whole lot of time doing something that is irrevocable and a painting, I'm going to think about it in my head a lot more before I do it. Whereas with digital tools, you basically dive in and simply do it. And because it's infinitely flexible, I can go back and change anything at any point. And you might think that's really, really great. And it is. Again, I'm not saying that it isn't bad. I am a digital artist. I think that the advantages outweigh the drawbacks, but I'm always considering what it is costing. And maybe the best place to do a lot of planning is on paper, or possibly it's in the head, in the imagination. What is lost when the very complex, many-stepped process of doing a finished oil painting or pastel or watercolor is compressed into one process in digital art. The way that I've developed working is everything is compressed into one because the digital tool is so flexible. The drawing, the design, value, color, all that happens at the same time. But as a traditional way of working, you do many thumbnails, then you do grisaille sketches and work things up very carefully, many preparatory stages, and then full-scale cartoons, and then tracing down the cartoons, and then doing underpainting, and then only then glazing over. So everything is, it's like long division. It's breaking things down into processes. So I think it is very interesting to see the effects of that compression of process into one piece. And I bet if you went back and talked to old masters and told them about the computer, what would they say? They'd say, "Wow, that sounds really awesome." And you say, "Oh gosh, all those late nights working in the dark, would all be over with." But what is the end result of it, of the computer? Do people draw better? Do they make better artwork now? Certainly, it's has a greater variety to it. Like I was saying earlier about experimentation, it's far easier to try 100 different variations of something digitally than it is with pencil and paper. They might say that the work that they did had to happen in their mind first, and planned out carefully before even working with pencil. I'm sure their process was iterative, back and forth, a dialogue between artist and paper. But even paper was expensive, so they probably did a lot of it in their mind. When it is possible with digital tools to turn out massive piles of imagery, to do small variations on things, to use procedural generation of shapes in 3D programs, or programs like Alchemy or ZBrush, and you turn out all this stuff, and then you evaluate what is there, and then continue on. I suppose that is analogous to taking a broad pencil and drawing a bunch of shapes on paper. But as I was pointing out, and the sketches versus finish, is every step in the process has a big influence on what is finally turned out. And that's why I was imploring people to do many small sketches and explore process as much as possible. And try out pencil and paper the way old masters would. Try ZBrush and try to run it through the mill as many different times as you can. Sometimes one way of working might be a bit too characteristic or too influential. Say, for instance, the program Alchemy, using a mirror brush, and it's very a characteristic look. It's almost a bit gimmicky that it overpowers the artist. Sometimes I think that the writers of the software that we use are doing the real creative work, especially when there's something that is as powerful as Alchemy or the 3D programs, that it puts a definite stamp on the work. So be careful of that, and maybe if you were to use Alchemy to do some type of winged creature from a dead-on straight isometric view, don't paint over it directly. Maybe use it as simply visual inspiration, and only paint looking at it out of the corner of one eye, as opposed to painting right over the top of it. Now I do that with 3D imagery quite a bit, building some simple block models in 3D and then eliminating that entirely, because the edges, you'll never get rid of them. Using it as visual reference and drawing reference only, but painting it entirely, because it leaves its stamp on the work far more than I would care for.